So we're here in the lovely game room at the City Club San Francisco. Thanks for letting us be here. I have a really great friend of mine, James Hudson, here, and I thought it'd be a great idea to have him on the show because he is an expert in all things HR. But we're going to talk about more than just human resources and job search and the job market. We're going to talk about life. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, so James, before we get started, give us a little intro.
As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from around here. I started my career in London 20 years ago. I was lucky enough to join what was at the time a very small digital business, which grew to be a very large digital business. And I led and built the internal recruiting team. When I joined, I was the first internal recruiter. And by the time I left, I'd established recruiting teams and offices in Hong Kong, Shanghai, London, and New York. And then for the last decade, I've been working in corporate America for my first 3 years in mainland Europe. And then I moved to California 7 years ago. In my most recent role, I led talent acquisition for Nike's direct-to-consumer businesses worldwide. My team of 100 recruiters were filling roughly 40,000 vacancies a year around the world. So I don't profess to have seen it all, but I've definitely seen a lot in terms of hiring, HR, corporate America, and hyper-growth digital businesses. And so I'm hoping to share some of that insight with you and your audience.
Yeah. So the show is about personal finance, life coaching, and a lot of people kind of find themselves wanting some coaching when they're in a life stage like the one you find yourself in. So when people are looking for a new job or a new opportunity, what's keeping you motivated right now?
You probably don't need to have seen the news recently to know that it has been a tough time in the macroeconomic environment, both here in the US and in China. And certainly in my line of work, thousands of recruiters have been laid off. And in 20 years of doing this, I've obviously seen a number of different economic cycles. This one definitely feels different. And what I mean by that is, I think for the first time, the asymmetries in the talent market have become significantly imbalanced. There's always imbalance in any marketplace, and certainly in the talent marketplace, there's imbalance. But this time around, I think the significant advances in consumer-facing tech, so Bard, ChatGPT, all the various AI tools that are enabling folks that are looking for work to turbocharge their applications, which, to be clear, is a really good thing. There is much more power now in the hands of folks that are applying to jobs. But at the same time, talent acquisition teams have been decimated. Meta used to have 10,000 recruiters. They've now got 1,000, so 90% reduction in their talent acquisition team. So not all talent acquisition teams have seen such significant reductions, but many of them have. And so you've got smaller teams working with legacy tools. And then on the flip side of that, you have many more people looking for work because of the macroeconomic environment, and they have more powerful tools at their disposal to look for work. So the net result of all of that is that inbound application volume has gone up by 100x. And the teams that typically respond to that volume are smaller, and they're hamstrung by legacy technology in many cases. And so invariably in the talent market, it's a signal to noise ratio, but that signal to noise ratio is worse than it's ever been.
Okay.
So the reality is, in today's job market, if you're just applying for jobs, which even 3 years ago was enough, if you're just applying for jobs online today, your application might never get seen.
Yeah.
So applying online is table stakes. That's the bare minimum that anyone should be doing.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So from what I get from that is there are many more people looking for work, many more applications out there, and not enough people to read them.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly what's happening 90% of the time.
Okay. So, I mean, if I were to look for a job right now, I think I would start with applications. Actually, no, I think I would turn to my network first. Like, what's your take on that?
It's a good question, and I like to try and anchor everything in data. And having hired tens of thousands of people over the years and worked with hundreds and hundreds of recruiters, I've got hundreds of thousands of data points. And what I can tell you has consistently been the case over the last 20 years of doing this worldwide. This is true in Europe, in Asia, and here in the United States. When I look at the data in aggregate, when I look at applicant sources over the course of a year or over the course of a decade, invariably the breakdown is the same. Roughly 50% of jobs are filled by inbound applications, roughly 30% are filled by referral, and roughly 20% are filled by recruiters proactively
Sure.
outreaching and sourcing candidates.
Okay.
And so in a market like this, you want to widen your net as far as possible. So you want to be included in that 50%, right?
Yes.
You want to be
Mhm.
applying online. You ideally also want to be included in that 30% by getting a referral from someone that works at the company. And in an ideal world, the easiest way to find a job is to have a recruiter at the company find you. So really what you need to do is apply online is table stakes,
Mhm.
networking to help get those referrals, but then also your discoverability online in places like LinkedIn. If you can capitalize on all of those three things, you stand a better chance of improving the signal to noise ratio in your favor.
I really like that. What I'm hearing is a multi-prong approach, right? Use your network, continue to apply because that's actually really good. I didn't know those statistics, so that's really interesting. And then be discoverable. I really like that. Whenever I hear about a new job, it's because someone is approaching me. But and I think it's because I am like super active on LinkedIn. I have a digital presence. I think it's catching people's attention. What's your take on all that?
It's absolutely critical to be discoverable online. That is a really broad statement and can mean a lot of things.
Sure.
And a great place to start is just by having a really well populated LinkedIn profile. If you think about LinkedIn as the digital storefront to your career, it's the living, breathing version of your resume. It needs to tell your career journey, it needs to accurately reflect what you've done and where you've done it. And when I'm coaching folks, the advice I always give is that your resume may or may not contain non-public material information, the size of budgets that you manage, the size of teams that you manage, the volume of deal flow, whatever. That's totally fine in a resume because it's not being seen by the general public. Obviously, information like that can't be in your LinkedIn, but it doesn't mean that your LinkedIn needs to be bare bones. There should still be enough information in your LinkedIn so that anyone viewing your profile can get a sense of what it is you did and where you did it.
What I'm hearing there is that, sure, if you have restrictions on the information that you can share, that in general terms, you could probably still describe the size of accounts or the size of business, the number of people involved in your day-to-day work.
Yes, at a bare minimum, you should be giving enough information so that folks understand what the scope and breadth of your role is. LinkedIn-wide data shows that 60% of recruiter searches are still based on job title, company, and location. So your profile needs to show where you live and work, the company at which you live and work, and what you do at that company, because 60% of the time, that's the search criteria that recruiters are using. The other 40% of the time, recruiters are starting their search based on skills. So in addition to populating your LinkedIn profile with your job information, you also need to be using the skills functionality to highlight which core skills, whether they're soft skills, hard skills, engineering languages, project management tools, whatever it is, that you're also calling those out on your LinkedIn profile. Because 40% of the time, a recruiter is looking for someone with Agile experience or Java experience. If you haven't called that out on your profile, you're not discoverable.
Wow. Okay. So that's actually really important. And I did not know that. I thought it was just like something nice to have on your LinkedIn profile. So another thing is we're talking a lot about LinkedIn as a tool, and it sounds like there's no way getting around it. Like if you want to be hired in 2023, you have to have a well-rounded LinkedIn profile.
For 90% of jobs in industry, yes. LinkedIn is now the primary source. It has 1 billion members worldwide, and it's continuing to grow. There are certain industries and job functions that are not well represented on LinkedIn. So I'm thinking more of the creative industries and creative type jobs. It's less optimal to curate your presence on LinkedIn, but for most job functions and most industry sectors, a presence on LinkedIn is critical.
Okay, so we talked a lot about skills being really important to showcase in your LinkedIn profile. Are there any other parts that I need to be paying attention to?
I think a lot of people get overwhelmed and intimidated by LinkedIn, especially when people talk about networking on LinkedIn
Yeah.
or content creating on LinkedIn. And I think people are overthinking it. At a bare minimum,
Yeah.
once you've populated your profile and started to spend time on the site and time going through the newsfeed, you can start just by reacting to content that's already there, commenting on posts that resonate with you, liking or reposting content that resonates with you. And once you've liked or commented on someone's post more than 2 or 3 times, that person is going to start to have recall of your name. And at that point, you can then reach out to them and connect with them.
Yeah.
And that's how you start to network and grow your connection in the digital realm. It's just by being present and active and responding to stuff that's already there. As you get more confident and you decide that you can have a point of view, you absolutely should start posting on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, because that obviously broadens your digital footprint. But there's no need to jump in at the deep end. You can start by responding to what's already there.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. When I look at that from like a professional point of view, it's like, of course, like you want to be rooting for people who are producing content that resonates with you, but also not be afraid to have your own voice. And I feel like maybe people don't like to share what they know. Do you find that?
I think because LinkedIn is seen as like the professional network, and it was always seen as a resume site or a CV
Sure.
site, that folks are hesitant to comment or to be active on the site, and also because invariably they're connected to people that they work with.
Right.
But just because you're commenting on something that's happening in your professional sphere does not mean you're saying, I'm looking for another job.
Right.
You know? And
Right.
I think the more that you spend time on the site, the more that you'll feel comfortable interacting with other folks in your space.
Yeah.
It's much more subtle than I think people give it credit for.
Okay, yeah. So we're saying go in there, and if you have expertise, showcase your expertise.
I think like anything, whether it's digital or in real life interactions, trying to be your authentic self is
Yeah.
the surest way
Sure.
to resonate with other folks. Speak to what you know, what you're an expert on, and you will find reach. The way the LinkedIn algorithm works is it looks at what is your professional background, what do you know, and if you're making posts that connect with what you already know in your career, the algorithm gives a boost to your content. So when I talk about careers or hiring or HR, I find significant reach. When I talk about my personal passions of fashion and travel and art and collecting, I don't get much reach because I'm not an expert in those things, according to LinkedIn. I'd like to think I'm an expert in those things. But LinkedIn sees my 20-year career history in HR, and therefore my HR content gets the most reach.
Sure. I think I was on LinkedIn and you just commented on like a news article on LVMH, and you just said something really subtle about it, but it just felt like it's like, oh, but of course he's going to talk about retail, like that's his background.
Yeah. And I like LVMH. You can hire me.
Yes, there we go. So you're kind of like on this new journey. You're like coaching people now.
Yes. So when I got the news at the beginning of the summer that me and my entire team were getting laid off, it was obviously a bit of a shock. And I had started spending, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because it's my job. But even when I lost my job, spending even more time on LinkedIn. And I was kind of dismayed to see that there had been a bit of a gold rush in terms of content creators coming to LinkedIn, because it's an old platform, but content on the platform is a relatively new thing in terms of the volume of the content that's
there's
there
a
now.
lot.
And certainly folks, that content creators in other spheres have started migrating to LinkedIn because they find they get better engagement.
Sure.
Especially on platforms like X, where they've seen their engagement fall off a cliff since all the various changes. The downside to all of that is that there are lots of folks on LinkedIn that are non-experts, but they are influencers, and they're creating content that is
misleading,
at best erroneous, and at worst just pure snake oil and trying to make a sale.
Sure.
And my reaction to that was, first of all, to try and post factual content based on how I know the hiring process works.
Yes.
And you cannot beat the ATS. You cannot. You can pay $500 for
the ATS?
The applicant tracking system.
Oh, okay.
And you can pay $500 for a resume, but it does not mean that you will get hired. you know?
Yeah.
And so I encourage folks to think critically and to not equate millions of followers with a depth of expertise.
Oh, yeah.
If
I
someone's worked in HR, great.
Whew, I find a lot of that like these TikTok financial advice people, and I'm like, what? Where did you get that? And where is it like how are you backing that claim? If you are a professional in the eyes of the Securities and Exchange Commission, we're actually really regulated on like what we can talk about in terms of like rates of return. And I don't know why this links to what you were saying.
It's about influencers
Oh
claiming
yeah.
to be experts in subjects that they're not.
Yes, I see. I
Yeah.
got on such a good tangent. I forget where I was going with it.
And
But
it breaks my heart that cynical folks are making money from people that are, in desperate situations that have been laid off, that are looking for work and looking for solutions and are being sold courses or solutions
sure.
that are not based on any kind of facts at all.
I think what happens too is like when you're, and I'll let you speak to this in a second, but when people are in that shock and that fear of having just recently lost a job, I think people become more vulnerable to things that are supposed to change things really quickly for them.
Yeah, understandably, folks are looking for a solution, right? And looking for a quick solution. But that doesn't mean that influencers should prey on them and make money from folk that, are thinking they're buying a solution when they're not.
Yeah.
And so my reaction to that, first of all, was to try and post content that was fact based, that helps guide people in the right direction and helps answer some of the misinformation that's out there. And it's been super gratifying that, from starting posting just 6 months ago, I've now reached 2.5 million folks with what I'd like to believe is, accurate, credible information, which
Yeah.
will help them with their job search. And then to layer on to that, because I'm not working and because I have free time, I started offering free coaching, which I now do every single week. And it's been so gratifying to spend that time helping folks navigate what is becoming an increasingly opaque talent market. And, I only offer a limited number of sessions every week because I'm doing it for free. But I'd like to think in some small way, it's putting the right energy out into the universe, and it will create a ripple effect that hopefully will help, push back the tide a little bit of the increasing amounts of misinformation we're seeing on the platform.
We talked a little bit about the emotional side of like what happens after people have lost a job. In your personal experience, if you feel open to sharing,
Yeah,
like what was like your emotional journey after you found out that you were losing your job?
sure. I mean, layoffs are tough. Obviously, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But having led talent teams for 20 years, I've seen multiple cycles like this. And so it definitely is not my first rodeo, either having to do layoffs or being laid off. I've been on both sides of the desk over the last 20 years. You definitely need a strategy. And in this market, more than ever, you need a strategy because more than ever, it's going to be a marathon, not a sprint.
Okay, so getting laid off is an emotional journey. Like you've been through it yourself. What was your experience, and then what's your advice?
It's a great question. I think the first thing you need to do when you get the news is breathe. It is always a shock. It's always awful. And I honestly don't think it's an exaggeration to say that you need to go through the grieving process, all the stages of grief from
Yeah,
fear, anger, shock, denial, all of those things. It's totally normal to feel all of them. And
yeah.
it can happen very quickly. You can feel them all over a 24-hour period, or
Like,
it may take longer. And give yourself the grace to, first of all, process the news.
yeah.
But then you do need to get into action.
Mm-hmm.
And by getting into action, I don't mean immediately applying for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That is 100% the wrong thing to do.
Okay.
And let me explain why. It's going to be a marathon and not a sprint. And you need to take a pragmatic approach to how you're going to tackle it. And it all starts with your emotional and your financial well-being, because it's like the oxygen mask thing, right? You need to take care of yourself first, especially when you're committing to something that's going to be a challenge, something that's going to drain you. And I always recommend to folks sit down literally with a spreadsheet and work out what are your overheads.
Mm-hmm.
What does it cost to keep the lights on, to pay your rent, pay your
Yeah.
mortgage, pay all of your bills, buy your groceries, pay your healthcare?
I ask my clients, do you know how much it takes to run your life for 1 month?
Nobody
And
ever does, right?
and no, yeah, no one ever does, so it's our trick question. So don't feel bad if you don't have it. But if you have been putting off putting together a spending plan, guess what? Now you actually really, really need one. And I just have my clients take a list of all of their essential items, things that are not discretionary, things that have to get paid.
How much does it cost to run your life? And my advice might be slightly different to yours in that,
But my advice is superior.
sure. Um, in addition to the essentials of your life, I always say factor in, you don't want a bare minimum budget because this
Yeah,
might be 6 months and you
yeah,
still want to go to the movies or go out for dinner.
sure.
And sure, you might not be having dinner at Chez Panisse once a week, but you still want to be able to like
Yes,
have
be reasonable and don't go necessarily into like a scarcity mode.
exactly right. Avoid scarcity because you want to be able to endure this for however long it takes.
Yeah,
And
you said
so
endure this.
it'd be,
Okay.
and I use the word endurance in the sense of marathon, right?
Yeah.
It's an endurance activity you're about to engage in, and the best way to succeed in an endurance activity is preparing your mind and your body and your emotions to
Yeah.
deal with that.
Yeah.
So let's say, for example, it costs you $5,000 a month to run your life
Yeah.
to a livable and enjoyable standard. And with a combination of severance, savings, and unemployment, you know that you've got $50,000 in liquidity before you need to do anything drastic, before
Mm-hmm.
you need to access your 401k or whatever that might
Mm-hmm.
be.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got your runway. You know that you've got $50,000 at $5,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
You know that you've got 10 months. That is your job search
Okay.
runway. And even just doing that exercise helps give you a bit more perspective into what it's going to look like.
It gives you more opportunity to go back to step one and breathe some more,
Yeah.
possibly. Yeah, I always talk about this with some clients. It's like your best thinking doesn't come from when you're in like a panicked or fearful state. Your best thinking comes when you're like relaxed and focused.
Yeah, 100%. So figure out your personal runway, understand how long you've got
Yeah.
before you need to take a survival job or you need to.
Oh, I like that word, survival job.
Yeah.
Like just what's your
So that might mean, in college I waited tables, I was a cater waiter. There are things that we've done in our past that we may need to do again. That's something you may need to consider if you get to the end of your runway. You really don't need to be spending more than 90 minutes a day on your job search.
Wow, okay. So 90 minutes a day on your job search.
Yeah, and included in that can be obviously applying to jobs, can be networking, can be making content for LinkedIn if that's part of your strategy, and can be actually having interviews. Like all of that, Monday to Friday, 90 minutes a day is more than enough to focus on your job search. And the great news about job searches today is that you can do this from anywhere, right? You can be a digital nomad during that time if you want. But if you're only spending 90 minutes a day, Monday to Friday, on your job search, it frees up a lot of time.
Yeah.
During that time, you should absolutely not feel guilty about recharging if that's something you need to do. You should absolutely not feel guilty about spending small amounts of discretionary money because you know that you've got that within your budget.
Yeah.
You absolutely should not feel guilty about indulging time in hobbies or pastimes or creative endeavors that you might otherwise not have the
Yes.
bandwidth for.
I want to go back to that. Like your best thinking does come from like those moments. So it might feel like it's playtime, but subconsciously you're working out problems in the back of your mind. So I like that. Have time for some recharge and play.
Yeah, 100%. And then the two most important pieces of advice. We're super fortunate to live in California, so it's possible to be outdoors pretty much year round here. Get outside and get some physical exercise, whether that's running, walking, riding your bike. It doesn't, you might have put your gym membership on hold. That's totally fine. You can still exercise outside.
Yeah.
Get physical exercise. It's good for your body, it's good for your soul, it's good for your mind. It's absolutely critical as part of your endurance journey.
I would imagine like sometimes I would maybe even like fall into this like, nope, I got to be in front of the computer for an extended period of time, and that shows that I'm dedicated to my job search.
You do not need to do that.
Yeah.
I'm giving you permission to step away.
Yeah.
90 minutes a day is the maximum you need to invest.
Yeah.
It can be in a 90-minute block, or you could do it in 3 30-minute blocks, but that's the maximum you need. You're not adding any value beyond 90 minutes. You can submit an application in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And there aren't going to be that many jobs to apply for every single day. So any more than that is wasted time. And
I feel like it would even just like increase your stress level unnecessarily.
Yeah. 100%. You're forcing yourself into presenteeism, which is we hate in the workplace. Why would you do that to yourself when you're not at work?
Yeah.
Enjoy as much as you can the time off. But the single most important thing you can do is give back. Whether that's volunteering in your community, whether it's volunteering at your kid's school, doing what I do and volunteering and giving away coaching sessions online, you will be so amazed at how giving back to the community around you gives back to you.
Yeah.
It improves your mood and it helps you network.
100%. And I feel like one of the dangers of applying for jobs and not getting the response that you want is that this saboteur mind gets a really loud megaphone and says, you are not good enough. And I think when we're coaching or being of service, we get like maybe a little bit of the validation that's just like, oh, wait, I do know stuff and I am a valuable contributor.
That's 1,000,000% accurate. Even in a normal market, you're going to hear no more than you hear yes. And that can erode your sense of self-worth, your sense of confidence.
Yeah.
When you've been laid off, obviously all of that is magnified and exacerbated. Again, it comes back to it's a marathon, not a sprint. You need endurance. And in order to mitigate and quiet that voice, you need tools and resources, which is where exercise, volunteering, giving back, all of those activities help offset the negative emotions that you are inevitably going to feel during the course of your job search process.
Yeah. Okay. So when you say inevitably feel, that tells me that in this process, you're going to have a level of acceptance that the no's are going to be more frequent than the yeses.
Yes. You are going to hear no more than you hear yes. And it's tough, but you have to be resilient.
A lot of people talk about, oh, I've got this side hustle. What's your take on that? Should the side hustle become the main hustle, or what's your idea?
I've definitely evolved my thinking on this. For the longest time, I couldn't have a side hustle because for my first 5 years in America, I was on a visa. And so federal government have very strict point of view about your revenue sources when you're on a visa. Obviously, that's no longer the case. I'm fortunate to be a permanent resident now. And so that's opened up a whole range of new possibilities for me. And I would certainly encourage anyone that is able to start to think about augmenting their personal revenue streams. Hopefully, you never get laid off, but increasingly, as the employment relationship between labor and corporate continues to grow and balance, it is inevitable at some point that you will face a layoff. And so the better insulated you are is all to the good.
You know, when I put that in the realm of personal finance, clients about diversifying their portfolio, this is diversifying your income streams, and that is okay.
It's not just okay, it's a great thing.
It's a great thing. And it's maybe some hard news to accept, but there is a likelihood, higher likelihood than ever before, that you might get laid off, and having this to kind of augment your personal income is a safety precaution.
Yeah, and I think if you go into it clear-eyed that it's just supplement to your main income, and hopefully it's something that you're good at and that you find enjoyable, and don't overthink it, I think that's the best way to frame it in your mind. Don't expect it to become your primary revenue stream and that you can quit work. That may happen, and if it does, fantastic.
Yeah, right.
But, you know, even if it just pays for a family vacation or helps you upgrade your car or whatever it might be, I think taking a pragmatic view and then being pleasantly surprised if it grows beyond $1,000 a month, that's probably the best way to win at that.
Yeah, I love that. James, we're just about up with our time, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to share any parting thoughts.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. And maybe I've been living in California too long, but I firmly believe that everything happens for a reason, and that sometimes, you know, even setbacks like a layoff, it's just the universe nudging you in a different direction.
Yeah.
Sometimes the universe whispers, sometimes it shouts.
Yeah.
Sometimes it shouts a message that you don't want to hear. But what has always been true for me is that in hindsight, I see that I was being guided in a new direction,
Yeah.
and all of the setbacks that I've had have always led on to new and better things. So I know it can seem really tough right now if you're going through a layoff, but trust me, it does get better.
Yeah, there's like a really good proverb I heard. Who's to say that this is actually bad? You know, time will tell. Yeah, being open to what the universe is going to bring to you. Yes, we are in California. We should tell them the story about when we were in a shop that was selling crystals.
Can you feel it?
Can I can feel it. There was a full moon last night. Did you feel that?
Always.
I was recharging my crystals. I don't know about you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you again
You're
for
so
being our
welcome.
guest. We're
Thank you for having
definitely
me.
going to have you back, if anything, just for that pretty accent of yours. Thanks for watching. If you liked anything that we shared today, go ahead and like it, share it, subscribe if you feel like it. And if you have any questions for James, drop them in the comment section below. Also, we'll have contact information so that you can follow James on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Manny.
Thanks, James.